That's a good question. And there's a little bit of a story to it. I hope you don't mind. When I went to do my PhD, everyone was into dynamics, and I ended up working with a phonetician. So speech rhythm was the thing I became occupied with, and I had people because if you think dynamically, and you're not very good at it, like we weren't, then you're using simple mass spring equations, right? And if you're using simple mass spring equations, then an obvious thing to do is to get people to repeat something along with a metronome. But you can look at the coupling in time, you've got measurements in time, you can be all sciencey about it, and you can do plots and experimental conditions, wonderful experimental theater. And so I had people speaking along with metronomes. And then just after the end of my PhD, I had a sort of a bombshell one day. I was taking a nap at lunch in Northwestern University, and I just did a drawing of two heads linked together. And I went to sleep. And for the next 2 years or so, I was busy, but when I arrived back in Dublin, I pulled out that drawing and went, hang on, that was important. What was I supposed to do with that? And I realized people don't like speaking with bloody metronomes. People love speaking with people. So I started getting people in and doing the same kind of game, asking people to speak together without a clock. And boy, were they good. Astonishingly, like the voice is incredibly plastic. In the course of a day, you might speak to your aged mother, you might holler at the kids in your lawn, you might plead with your social worker over the phone, you might shout at your husband, your voice is incredibly plastic and fits the circumstances. But give two people a laboratory, tell them, speak together in time, 3, 2, 1, go. They lock on like a machine. It's machine-like. In fact, Deleuze's idea of the machine is very apt here. It is machine-like how they synchronize their speech. Now, phoneticians live in a world of variability. They are always looking for invariance, usually because they've been praying to the false gods of Chomsky linguistics. They've been trying to do cleanup on the messy physical reality in order to deliver pristine symbols to the phonologist. Here's a phoneme, sir. Here's a tone. Very difficult things to find in the messiness of the real world. But if invariance, when it occurs, is astonishing to a phonetician. And when you get two people together and they lock together in this machine-like fashion, with no practice, they don't even get better with practice. They can do it. We just have this ability. I was flummoxed. And so I studied this for a few years, and I called it synchronous speech. And I think I have to be careful with my terms. Put two people in a lab, asked them to do this machine-like task of reading an unmotivated sentence, and that's synchronous speech, and it's very interesting. So then, young professional, I started applying for grants. Right? Went through round after round of grant application. Lots of my colleagues were interested in what I had to say, and we kept not getting funding. There were often collaborative grants. But the thing about grant writing, and this is maybe a useful lesson for young academics, is it can be incredibly rewarding not to get funded. Every time you approach money, you have to tell a story, which means you have to not only convince the funders, you have to sort of convince yourself a little bit first. And so the story got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I went from studying two speakers reading unmotivated sentences in a machine-like fashion in the laboratory to realizing that I had stumbled in to an Aladdin's cave of human forms of assembly and communion, chanting. I then had to discipline it. Over the years, I've developed the term joint speech because I think it's extremely important. If you ever want to understand what kind of being we are, this is I'll use the term languaging behavior. I'm not using language in the Chomskyan sense, but this is found in every society as far back as we can peer, long before history appears, long before writing appears. The oldest written evidence we have is already testament for vibrant existence of liturgical structure with chanted elements. I'm speaking of the Temple Hymn of Kesh of 2600 BC. Wonderful piece. And it has clear verse chorus structure. You can see where people are supposed to join in. People chant, and Well, since then, I've just been running around thinking about chanting or joint speech because if you are modest in your knowledge about minds, bodies, and the whole philosophical stuff, sometimes it's useful to have an uncontroversial empirical starting point. Remember, we said if we put the teapot on the table, there's more to this teapot than you and I can ever fathom or intuit or something. But for utilitarian purposes, if we're getting on with our lives and we want to have a tea ceremony, for example, grant, we've got an empirical starting point. Joint speech does this. And I have defined it as multiple people uttering the same sounds at the same time. That definition has been polished a bit over the years. So I said uttering, I didn't say speaking or singing. I said sounds, I didn't say words or texts. But one thing about that definition is it allows you to find it. You can go out there and you can find this all over the place. So it is, in a way, a sampling device. That is, we can take our observations, wherever this occurs, and like moving beyond the teapot to the tea ceremony, don't worry about the words they're speaking. Well, we can go back to the words they're speaking, they're kind of interesting. But what the hell's going on? What's going on there? We're not in a laboratory. We're in somewhere where human stuff is going on. And what happens is quite remarkable. I'm only beginning to understand this myself. So if you look at the history of the emergence of psychology and sociology at the end of the 19th century, psychology becomes a weird thing, which was, we don't even have to go into that. Let's just leave psychology there. Sociology arose because people had discovered society. Nobody ever noticed society before. Now, society isn't a thing, but when you notice it, suddenly it's a thing. And because of the naturalistic register and the power of the sciences in the late 19th century, they were freaked out by ants. You know how much work the Victorians did on ants? Man, they're all over the place. Aldous Huxley's brother, Julian, was working on ants. Trophallaxis. Ants have loads to tell us. But when you look at an ant colony, you've got this clear, stark divide between the individual and the collective. Furthermore, the individual seems to be sacrificed to the collective. Right? Yeah, fixed social roles, no bettering yourself. You're a worker, you're a drone, you're a queen, and you sacrifice yourself for the good of. So in a sense, the colony is the unit you're concerned with, the subject. The ant is a organ of the larger colony. And this freaked them the hell out because this is the time of the Industrial Revolution. You've got the beginning of you've got your disciplinary societies, you've got everyone's going to the factories. Everyone's moving into urban locations, going to fixed workplaces, and urban living is becoming a thing. So it scared the bejesus out of them. Sociology came along and tried to get a handle on things, and it still does. And sociologists for 150 years now have tried to get other people to believe that social things are really real. They're not epiphenomena that arise only as the result of interaction of preformed individuals, but they are real. If you have a solipsistic psychology, the social is now epiphenomenal. If we encounter a theater in which someone has shouted the word fire and everyone's in a panic, then there's no fluid dynamics going on. There's just a bunch of individuals. Whereas you'll understand what's going on much better in terms of fluid dynamics, to be honest with you. If people are running through narrow exits, you don't want to ask them about how connected they feel to the universe and what their working memory is doing. That's the wrong way to view what's going on. The flow through the door is the real thing here. Psychologists are not needed. So sociologists have had this problem. Others have similar definitional problems of getting people to take the things they study really serious and to draw lines, because we always draw lines around things. Ritual studies is another one. And the word religion has messed up everything. I'm sorry. The manner in which we talk about religion has messed up everything, so that arguing over the bounds of ritual, for example, becomes a rite of passage if you're in cultural studies. And it's a bit pointless. Now, if instead, as an embodied cognitive scientist, I say, I don't know anything about culture or society or persons, I'm going out there, I'm looking for joint speech because I've got an empirical definition. Where do I land? And having done this for 20 years, I'll tell you where you land. There are four big domains that pop out that are not otherwise linked. They are ritual, sports, protest, and primary education. There are interesting differences between these, and joint speech occurs in very many other occasions. It's not limited by these. But these domains articulate themselves when you start studying joint speech, which allows you to ask about commonalities as well as specificities. You know, if you're in cultural studies, you like to draw out the specific. But I'm more of a lumper than a splitter. I want to see what's going on here in common between them. The fact that we got here with a description of a behavior that we really don't understand, but that is foundational for human social living, is kind of important. Every society has its rituals. They don't all have the sports, that's true. Most of them have some kind of primary education. And protest is fairly widespread. What an interesting set to consider together. So, because of the way that we've messed up the discourse, I'm now beginning to speak of these as domains of human assembly and communion. I don't even like the word human in there. I said we're persons. I'm not granting any existence to a superordinate category with a clear boundary. But this is peopling, as Alan Watts would say. This is peopling. And every time you see peopling in this fashion, I at least just go, wow, how could we not have seen this before? What's being brought into existence is transitory. It needs to be enacted. It needs to be. This is why we can start looking at some of the structural characteristics of joint speech. Often, there's a huge amount of repetition. Speakers and listeners are not distinguished. The way we normally think about language and mind is not relevant here. Things have to be said, and they have to be said again and again and again. There's no information transfer, message passing. I don't want to speak for the Virgin Mary, but the Hail Mary, I got it first time, guys. There's no news value in it. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking is about are activities that must be done in a certain sense. So let's look at the must be done. Rituals. Many rituals have to be carried out in order to keep the cosmos going. I don't know, if you dive into other cultures, other traditions, whether you find yourself in Islam, in Judaism, in Buddhism, in Taoism, wherever you find yourself, you will find rituals that are important to ensure the stability of the cosmos. And participation is often mandatory. Protest has its own urgency. We're not protesting because we want to, we're protesting because we have to. Primary education, there's an interesting asymmetry here because it's the values of the elders which are being stamped on the juniors. It's not the children who decide this, but and here's the advantage of having this frame now. This makes it immediately comparable when we look at little British school kids reciting their times tables. 3 times 3 is 9, 3 times 4 is 12. They do this all over the world. And you go to a madrasa in Pakistan or Kenya or somewhere, and now you find kids chanting the Quran. Mathematics is not Islamic studies. But in each case, the sacred values of the authorities are being stamped on the children, and it's very important that the children do this chanting. In fact, when you get into Quranic studies in many parts of the world, kids, there's a virtue to speaking the words of the Quran. It's speech, it's not a text. And kids are encouraged to speak it, and there's great virtue to knowing the whole Quran off by heart. No importance placed on understanding. You don't have to speak Arabic. You just have to make the sounds. So that obligatory character is, you could say the same of kids learning maths. You don't have to understand it. You just have to be able to do the equations. Embarrassingly similar. So that's the power of joint speech. It allows me to see these processes and wonder why they've been missed. The fact is that, of course, the study of any one of these belongs to a different domain. You know, you're in cultural studies, you're in ritual studies. Oh God, there's religion. Oh no, no, we're over here in political science. We're doing protest. Yeah. But if I determine forms of assembly and communion, that allows us to make these comparisons, see things like the asymmetry in the educational sense, place it beside the protest sense, place it beside the ritual sense. And sports is very important in the contemporary sense, but it has also some interesting features. You don't get chanting in all sports. You get chanting precisely in those sports in which you get transgenerational support. Team sports with transgenerational support. My dad supported Leeds United, so I support Leeds United. And you can swap the players in and out, and it doesn't matter. You know, when Boris Becker leaves the tennis stage, he's not replaced by someone else. There's a new player there. But your footballers can be swapped in and out. Now, different sporting traditions develop different kinds of chanting traditions, of course. But to come back, you asked me a simplistic question about identity earlier. What did I think about identity? And I said, who's, where, what's been asserted? And I pointed to the Boy Scouts just because I wanted to avoid the question. But now we're going to come back to identity, because what is happening when you go to the football stadium, like a pilgrimage, you go to the football stadium every week, or you go once every 4 years to the World Cup, and you join in this heaving mass of other bodies and you commune in support and in reenactment of your identity as a supporter of your team. This is a non-essentialist and enacted view of identity.
This is so tough conceptually because, I mean, all the different fields that try to deal with these things, sociology, political science, cultural studies, just have such different views as to even the autonomy that they attach to the subject of study here, right? Like some may look at it in a epiphenomenal or a reductive way, and some see it as emergent phenomena to be explained, and then, I mean, not to mention that just conceptually the language of discourse is all over the place.
The language of discourse is all over the place, and that's why I said at the start of our conversation here that I'm going to try and speak as an embodied cognitive scientist. And I try not to get lost in jargon, to be honest with you, and I start with an empirical starting point. And what I may refer to, these word merchants here and there, I have found that because I'm sensitized by my education and concerns, that I have available to me a means of looking at peopling, which is enormously rich and is not currently exploited. And it doesn't get, yes, introducing this now back into the discourse, that leads to difficulties. On the other hand, a lot of the discourse is so polluted that you wouldn't want to.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just a better idea to start fresh.
Or say what you have to say it well, say it in an appropriate time and place, and just be done with it. Don't rack up meaningless publication.
I feel like there's a multi-layered problem here. Like I think sometimes you treat something as reductive to another science or another domain of explanation, but I don't think reduction like that is ever that clean that you can just explain all social phenomena is reduced to the epiphenomenal expressions of some predisposed psychological agent.
Oh God, no. Now I have to say, I hope this isn't too shocking. I'm not a big fan of explanation. I think explanation is a form of violence. Explanation kills something. Once you've explained it, that's it. I mean, okay, if I have to assemble an IKEA flat pack bed, I want someone to explain to me how to do it, because then we're done. If I'm looking at peopling, I don't want explanation. I want more. I want more puzzlement. I want more problems, more questions, because I'm seeing so much. I don't want to kill it with explanation.
What about understanding? Is understanding more friendly to you?
Yeah, understanding is a slightly more noble goal than explanation. Explanation is shut up. I told you. Did you not understand? Understanding is, oh, okay, I feel I have a grasp on it myself, which means maybe I could produce similar justifying statements in an appropriate context that come from me, not from by referring to the authority in the textbook. Understanding is good. It's not the end, though.
Right, right. Anything that limits to one modality, like building a model of something amounts to understanding, is always going to be limiting.
So you mentioned in passing an interesting word earlier on when we were discussing IQ tests. You mentioned the word wisdom. That's a peculiar word, isn't it? We'd like science to be a form of wisdom, but it sure as hell is not a form of wisdom. We speak of wisdom traditions, but we speak of them with a certain nostalgia and fondness, and of course necessary bias. It's true. Let me pull back a little bit and just take a position with respect to scientific discourse. As an embodied cognitive scientist, I am informed not just by science, and certainly not just by science of the last 10 years. I am informed by the history of Western thought, and increasingly by the dialectical activity between Indian schools. Buddhists, we don't even have good words for these, right? Right. We gloss things over with this stupid British Empire word of religion and Hindu and so on. But the debates that have gone on between Advaita Vedanta, Kashmiri Shaivists, and Buddhists of various stripes are absolutely wonderful, have been held respectfully, rely on a common commitment to what I think are our goals as well, which is finding a way of living appropriate to an embodied being, and possibly even an ecstatic and joyous way of living. And it's traded by various words in the marketplace. So in the Christian marketplace, we trade heaven, afterlife. There you go. Just shut up. You get it. You get it in the next life. And in Buddhist terms, we promise them some nonsense called enlightenment or moksha, liberation. But that's just soteriology. And psychology is the miserable soteriology of the scientific discourse, right? I found it very interesting when I used to drive into work and I'd have the radio on a long time ago. And anytime they'd occasionally interview scientists. And you could always tell when there was a psychologist was being interviewed because the tone of voice changes. Suddenly they're speaking in a breathy voice because, they're there to calm you. They're worried about you. They're interested in what's good for you. Chemists, when they're talking about rust, don't have to change the tone of their voice. What kind of science is this that needs to change the tone of its voice? So science has a problem. It delivers vaccines. Yeah, well, interesting. A lot to think about with vaccines. Atomic bombs, killing machines, drones, surveillance society, support for authoritarian regimes. Science delivers us all kinds of things, but it sure as fuck is not a wisdom tradition. It's missing some pieces for that. You got to look for that elsewhere. Now, in cognitive science, we're not in the same business as physics, though we must meet someday. We are concerned with one of these beautiful generative triads that have informed most philosophical and theological schools. The relationship between the knower, the known, and the means of knowing. When I lay it out like that, then you can understand contemporary cognitive science as being a modern engagement with that particular triad in the language developed in the social historical circumstances after the Second World War with the talk of computers and informations and all that kind of junk. But you can see that inquiry into that triad is much older and has been made explicit in this form. You find it in Maimonides, you find it in Proclus, you find it in India, all over the place. And they're really good at this. There have been some really good moves made, but they can't be articulated in every circumstance. So what is contemporary cognitive science is done in a contemporary register, in a contemporary vocabulary for sale to the contemporary journals. The enterprise is older and can be articulated in many different ways. And that's why I say embodied cognitive science needs to disengage itself from cognitivist fantasies because we have a task ahead of us, but it's an old task. Yeah, exploring this is an old task. That's why, as I said, I'm not a big fan of explanation. I want to inquire.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really like your idea of explanation as violence. Like, I think with the contemplative traditions, nothing more can be true. There's no point to just giving an explanatory expression of the contemplative traditions. That's missing the whole point.
Absolutely. And the contemplative traditions have riches to offer us. There is so much we can learn. There are skills. They're not all well disciplined, well ordered, and professionalized, and available through universities. When you read of the insights of contemplatives, yeah, yeah, let's not give up on that. And that incidentally is not to privilege yogis in caves over scientists. You know, um, contemplation is not foreign to Europeans either. We have a long history of it. I draw from Christian mystics as much as from Indians. Nicholas of Cusa is one of my absolute favorites. Meister Eckhart. These are wonderful, wonderful writers. And their works can be put alongside the very, very best insights of people coming from the Advaitin, Shankaracharya, or Nagarjuna, or Kashmiri Shaivism, Avanavagupta. Those are the luminaries of those kinds of schools. They can be usefully combined because, you know, we're ignoramuses. I'm sorry, I was only born a couple of years ago. I'm only going to be around for a couple of years. I read a few books. What the hell do I know? What could I possibly know? Luckily, I've had an education and can see that, wow, some people have got somewhere over the years.
What do you make, like, at least of the in principle attempt to make science and the contemplative traditions friendly, if not compatible or expressed in similar languages of discourse, at least be able to work together?
Recognize they're not in the same business. They're not in the same business. Science is basically a way of engaging in a situation that can garner consensus. We agree instruments, we agree on what a measurement is and what is being measured and what use is to be made of those. So science is a very practical business. It's not what it's often mistaken for, the fundamental insight into the nature of reality. For that, contemplative traditions are required. And guess what? You're finite. You have a body and you're a bit stupid. That's as far as you're going to get. But if you can find your place in the universe in a body, that's kind of where the contemplative tradition. That's what heaven is that the contemplatives offer you, right? Yes, we can facilitate this. We can promote mutual forms of engagement, but we shouldn't mistake. You see, science is treated as a Delphic oracle. Scientists say, yeah, I hate that phrase. Boffins. You might as well call us boffins.
Okay, so let me ask you the hard question straight on then. What does wisdom mean to you then?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't. I Yeah, no, I don't have a view of that except that I've learned that some people are more trustworthy than others when I engage with some people with some subjects. They seem to. Some people I'm not bothered reading. Some people I am bothered reading. Some people I can learn from. If I'm learning stuff that's worthwhile, I think I am. Then those people I'm learning from have something, an orientation towards people, things, living that I can learn from. That's not to seal it, shrink wrap it into a tradition. It's to realize that this is going on all the time. And I think we're much better than we actually think we are. We can talk about the problems of scientific discourse till the cows come home, but that doesn't remove our fundamental brilliance. I think we are fundamentally gorgeous, wonderful creatures, but we're very bad at expressing that.